All right, special parallelograms. Special parallelograms, what really are rectangles and rhombus. Okay, rectangles and rhombus, that's what we call special parallelograms. Now, a squared is also part of it because a squared is both. It's a rectangle and a rhombus. So let's go over some rules. Let me clear this thing out. So a rectangle, let's talk about a rectangle. We know a rectangle, the opposite sides are parallel, and we know about the angles being 90 degrees. But on a rectangle, when we talk about the diagonals, so for today, let me focus on diagonals. Our diagonals are going to be these blue segments. It connects one corner with another corner, but it's not a side, right? So you see my diagonals go inside the figure. Now, interesting is that my diagonals are going to be cut in half. Okay, so what do I mean with that? Let's focus on this diagonal. So I highlighted the diagonal. Let's say, just to say a numbered, let's say the diagonal to begin with was, I don't know, let's say 16. The whole diagonal is 16. So I'm going to cut this into 8 and 8. My diagonal is going to be cut in half. Every parallelogram, that's what happens. But the interesting part of a rectangle is that the other diagonal is also the same length. So this side is 8 and this side is 8. Okay, that's going to happen in rectangles only. Squares, it happens as well, but because a square is a rectangle. Now, my measurements on the inside, when it comes to angles, let's use red for angles. Let's say the angle on the top was 100. Let's say it's 100. Now this other rectangle here, this other angle here will be 80. Two adjacent angles are always going to add up to 180. Remember, I used the word adjacent before. Adjacent means next to. So two adjacent angles add up to 180. So I have that this is 100 here, and this is 80 here. Pick any two adjacent angles, and you're going to see that they do add up to 180. Interesting part, though, is that they form an X on the inside. Opposite angles are congruent, right? Are the same number. Okay, so we have that. And another interesting part, let me focus on a triangle. Let me focus on this triangle. The interesting part is that any triangle I see, I'm picking one as an example. Any triangle that I pick is an isosceles triangle. Remember, isosceles means the two sides are equal, and I see the two sides measure 8. So it is an isosceles triangle. We talked about isosceles triangles before, that the base angles are equal. For right now, let's just say each angle is X, but I'm going to say they are equal. So I'm going to call X each of them. And I can figure out what X is, right? I know if I add the three angles of a triangle, X plus 100. If I add the three angles, it has to add up to 180. Now, let's just say that X is equal to 40. The algebra steps on how to solve for X, I'm not going to get into much detail on that because we know how to solve that. But I can find out that each of those angles happens to be 40. Right, and I can do the same for any triangle on my rectangle. Okay, so we're going to work with angles in a little, but this is the interesting part of a rectangle. Now, let's talk about a rhombus. Let me clear this out. Remember, you can always pause the video. Let me clear this out. Now, let me talk about a rhombus. Now, a rhombus looks like this. A rhombus, all the sides are the same length. But in this case, let me talk about my diagonals. Now, my diagonals, in this case, they cut each other in half like they do any parallelogram. They cut each other in half, but one diagonal is not necessarily the length of the other diagonal. Okay, what I mean with that is that, let's say the short diagonal, we cut it into 3 and 3 because the whole diagonal was 6 to begin with. But the long diagonal, the one that goes from up and down in this case, we can say this one could be, let's say 7 and 7. So the diagonal was cut in half, but one diagonal is shorter than the other. Now, interesting on the diagonals though, when it comes to angles, the angle in the center, right? In the center of my rhombus, they will always cross at 90 degrees. Okay. So any measurement, any angle on the inside will always be 90 degrees. My diagonals will always intersect at 90 degrees. Another thing that we're interesting on my rhombus, my diagonals cut each angle in half. What do I mean with that? Let me move to red. Let's say the angle at the bottom, at the very, very bottom, let's say to begin with was 50. I'm gonna cut it in half. So this will be 25 and this will be 25, right? I'm gonna cut the angle in half. That's the interesting that my rhombus do, rhombi for plural. There's the interesting part that happens to my diagonals with any rhombus. My angles get cut in half, all my angles. I'm just looking at one corner, but it happens with all my angles. Okay, so let's take a look at our work now. Let's take a look at our notes. Here for 39, I'm gonna work questions 39 and 40. Solve for the indicated measurement. The following is a rectangle. I need to find out what's the measurement of angle 7. So right here where the 7 is, this angle, let me call it X for right now. Because again, I don't know what it is. That's what I'm solving. And looking at the measurements inside, I see there's 116 degrees. And I'm supposed to be able to solve for angle 7 given that measurement. I know that because that's 116, let me go here. This other corner here, inside this is also 116. And again, I'm solving for angle 7, which right now I'm calling it X. Looking at a triangle, remember a rectangle, my triangles are isosceles. So I'm going to say that angle 7 is X and angle 1 is also measuring X. So I should be able to solve for X here. The way I'm going to solve this, I'm looking at a triangle. I have the 3 measurements of my triangle. So I'm just going to add the 3 angles, X plus 116. Notice I added the 3 angles of my triangle. And I know that when I add 3 angles of a triangle, they equal 180. All right, so let me separate my sides through the equal sign. On the left side, when I combine my letters, I see 1x plus 1x. So let me just call that 2x. Plus 116 is equal to 180. Right, I'm solving for x. The question was find the measurement of angle 7. And I call it x, so I'm solving for x here. Okay, so now I don't want the 116 here. When I move it to the other side as a minus 116, so I get that 2x is equal to, now 180 minus 116 gives me 64. So 180 minus 116 is 64. So I have the 2x equals 64. I don't have x by itself. Let me divide by 2. So x in this case happens to be 32. All right, the measurement of angle 7 is 32. We can see that that's what we were solving. It says we were solving for the measurement of angle 7. All right, let's take a look at question number 40. Solve for the indicated measurement. The following is a rhombus. In this case, I'm solving for the measurement of angle 8. Okay, so let's take a look. To be honest, just to start here, I'm gonna focus on a triangle. I'm solving for angle 8. So I'm gonna see for the triangle that has angle 8. I don't know how big is angle 8. Obviously, that's what I'm solving. So for right now, let me call it X. I don't know how big it is. I know in the center, this corner right here is 90. Right, that's what happens on every rhombus. So that corner is 90. And I'm gonna say this other corner where angle 9 is, I'm gonna call that 36. Because right there, angle V at that corner, the angle was cut in half. So if one half is 36, I'm gonna say the other half is 36. Now, when I look at that triangle, I know two angles. One of them is 36, the other one is 90. I can be able to solve for the third angle. Remember, here I'm solving for X. I was asked to find the measurement of angle 8, and I called it X because I didn't know how big it was. So let me add everything. X plus 36 plus 90. I added the three angles of a triangle, and this is equal to 180. Let me separate my sides through the equal sign. On the left side, let me combine my like terms. When it comes to letters, I just have 1x. When it comes to just numbers, 36 plus 90, let me call that 126. And I'm going to say all of this is equal to 180. To get the x by itself, the plus 126, let me move it to the other side as a minus 126. So I have x equals 180 minus 126 is equal to 54. So the angle that I was solving for is 54.